Principles of Economics, my complete guide to understanding economics, is now available in hardcover, audiobook, and ebook from Saifedean.com, Amazon, and many more booksellers worldwide. And now I am also teaching a course based on this book on my website, Saifedean.com. Principles of Economics will run the whole academic year, from September to June, and will have a new lecture every 2 weeks, as well as weekly live online discussion seminars open to learners from all over the world and from all walks of life. Whether you're a student, a professional, or a retiree, you are making economic decisions every day, and this course will arm you with the wisdom of centuries of economists to improve your economic decision-making. You'll also get a free book of Principles of Economics if you sign up for the course, and if you do it before September 20th, you'll get a 20% discount. Go to Saifedean.com and sign up now. The Bitcoin Standard podcast is brought to you by Crowd Health. Crowd Health is the Bitcoiner's answer to fiat health insurance. If you listen to this show, you've probably heard me rail against the problems of modern healthcare and health insurance. Crowd Health is a brilliant new solution to this problem that leverages the power of Bitcoin to help people get affordable healthcare. Crowd Health holds its cash reserves in Bitcoin. It negotiates with healthcare providers on your behalf and gets you much better rates by offering to pay them cash, upfront, without having to go through the expensive bureaucracy of modern healthcare insurance. It's a solution that works better for healthcare providers and for patients by disintermediating large insurance companies who have the wrong incentives and are constantly raising costs. I'm very happy to have signed up for Crowd Health, and I'm really excited to support them as they disrupt the fiat health insurance industry. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use the discount code SAIF, S-A-I-F, and you'll get the first 6 months for $99 only. Coinbits. Coinbits is a great way to introduce your pre-coiner friends and family to Bitcoin. Get them set up in under a minute and help kickstart their journey by turning everyday spare change into Bitcoin. This Bitcoin-only app takes the uncertainty and fear out of Bitcoin saving by rounding up debit and credit card purchases to the nearest dollar, then using the difference to buy Bitcoin. Set it, forget it, and let the app automatically tax your high-time preference spending by saving the hardest money ever. Want to save in Bitcoin faster? Customers can multiply their roundups up to 10x or adjust their savings frequency for weekly or daily Bitcoin stacking. Coinbits is built on a sound, tried and true dollar cost averaging strategy that turns Bitcoin's volatility in your favor. Once you've gotten a private wallet set up, Coinbits encourages you to withdraw your Bitcoin to your own private wallet and embrace the Bitcoin Standard way of life. Start stacking on coinbitsapp.com and save your time and energy in the soundest money ever. Get paid in Bitcoin regardless of who you work for and regardless of who is paying you. All thanks to a premium service I personally love and use, and that is Bitwage. Thanks to Bitwage, I receive my book's royalties in Bitcoin. It is cheaper, faster, and easier. It is a true set-it-and-forget-it system, and Bitwage has been offering this premium service since 2014. Anyone can sign up and use it right away. No restrictions or limits, fully non-custodial. You can even split your incoming payment. Get part in Bitcoin and part to a bank account you specify. It could not be easier, and I cannot recommend Bitwage highly enough. Go to bitwage.com and sign up now and get paid in Bitcoin with your next payment or salary. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Standard podcast. Our guest today is Doug Casey. Doug Casey is a speculator, investor, economic commentator, author of 7 books. His first book, The International Man, sold heavily in the 1970s. His second book, Crisis Investing, was on the New York Times bestseller list for 29 weeks back in 1980. And he has made a living and a career out of essentially practicing the ideals of anarcho-capitalism. I've heard a lot about Doug over the years. We have a lot of common friends, and I'm very curious about the lessons that he's learned over his life about money, markets, politics, government, and how to protect yourself from predatory governments, and how he lives his life as an anarcho-capitalist who doesn't just write about this, but also practices being an anarcho-capitalist in reality. Doug, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor to have you.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're in Argentina, huh?
Well, I'm usually in either Argentina or Uruguay, but during the northern summer, I'm in the U.S. I'm still retaining what you might call the tail of the skink here in the rapidly collapsing empire of the United States. So right now I'm on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay. It's the delightful physically, not so delightful politically.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the very interesting tidbits about you, which we might begin with, is that you have studied the world extensively to try and figure out where would be a good place to live. And you came up with the very non obvious choice of Argentina as a place to live. So, generally, if you're a capitalist, if you like markets, Argentina does not strike you as the obvious choice. But you've chosen Argentina, and you make a pretty interesting, perhaps even compelling argument for why Argentina. So, why Argentina?
The kangaroos. And when I answer people that ask that question, the kangaroos, they say, but there are no kangaroos in Argentina. And I say, yeah, I was misinformed. Uh, I first went to Argentina probably in 1980, and I always liked it from a cultural point of view. I mean, it's odd. Argentina is the polar opposite of one of my other favorite countries in the world, Thailand. Polar opposite geographically, culturally. But I spend most of my time in Argentina, which you're quite correct. From the point of view of an economist, an anarcho-capitalist, it would seem like a very illogical choice. But I like it because it's chaotic. A speculator might be defined as somebody that capitalizes on the distortions in the marketplace caused by government. He's somebody that capitalizes on the stupidity of government. Now, if we lived in a free market world, speculators would be chronically unemployed because there would be very few distortions in the market to capitalize on. But in Argentina, they're all over the place. So, well, that and the fact that it's cyclically, not always, but cyclically, and currently one of the cheapest countries in the world to live in. That's nice. Everybody likes cheap. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Everybody likes a bargain. And actually, I went there for the polo too, not the kangaroos. But so you've got to be someplace safe. And Argentina is just a delightful place to be. And as a non-resident foreigner, and officially I'm not a resident there, they leave you alone politically, especially if your Spanish is mediocre. So I can't say anything radical, or if I do, they won't understand me. So I'm just fine in Argentina.
Yeah, there's also obviously the steak, which is a huge plus point in Argentina. Great meat and some of the best and cheapest meat in the world, from what I understand from some Argentinian friends these days. It's incredibly cheap. But yeah, I think that there's something to this. That being a foreigner is a blessing at a time when governments have become so predatory. Their systems are optimized. Their nets are designed to capture their own citizens, and so if you're a foreigner, you can slip through the cracks quite easily because they work in large numbers, and they don't have that much of a capacity for extorting the foreigners quite as well as they have the sitting ducks that are that are tied to the place wherever you are. So there's definitely a huge advantage to just sliding along and slipping through the cracks of these kind of bureaucracies. And I can see how that could be useful in Argentina. And also, you're not in Buenos Aires, you're not in the capital, you're not dealing with all of the drama that comes with that. You're out in the
Well,
countryside, beautiful countryside.
I have an apartment in Buenos Aires that I bought back in 2007
Okay.
because Argentina, everything happens in the capital. We have a real estate development in Salta province in the northwest. That's an interesting story. And I also bought a large piece of land, well, not large by Argentine standards, but pretty large by American standards, down in San Martin de los Andes, which is kind of like Argentina's answer to Aspen or Davos or one of these kind of places. So I've been pretty active in the Argentine real estate market. And well, speaking about what I earlier said, we bought an apartment that was built during the golden era of Argentina, the times before 1920. And this apartment in an area of Buenos Aires that resembles the Upper East Side of New York. If the apartment was on the Upper East Side of New York, it would be $20 million easy. But back in 2007, I paid $1 million for it. Was it a good speculation? From a lifestyle point of view, sure. I got a 95% discount, and it's been delightful. But you'd think I would have made some money. But if I wanted to sell it today, I could still sell it for $1 million. Unfortunately, the $1 million is worth about half of what it was back then. So Argentina is right now at its cheapest level in history. I thought it was cheap back then, but it's even cheaper now.
Yeah, I keep hearing those stories about countries like Venezuela or Argentina. I know somebody who said back in the 90s, things got bad in Venezuela and they bought in, they moved there, or they bought because they thought this is the bottom. Things got so bad in the 90s when Chavez took over, I think, initially, and they thought, yep, things can only get better from here. And, it's been 20 years of plumbing new debts. And Argentina's been doing this, I should say, longer than Venezuela, but the Venezuelans have overtaken them with the levels of socialist dysfunction, I would say.
It's tough to pick a bottom in any market, especially when it comes to the descent of a country. Of course, all of Latin America is a political economic disaster zone. It really is. I don't think that Argentina will turn out as badly as Venezuela, though. The reason is that Venezuela had the misfortune. Well, it shouldn't have been a misfortune, but it's got the largest oil deposits in the world, but it's heavy oil. The problem with something like oil is that all that wealth in one place, the parasites just can't help but gather around it and try to steal all they can. So the oil is one of the things that ruined Venezuela, which in the 80s had the highest standard of living in South America. And I've been down there probably a half a dozen times. But Argentina, on the other hand, is an agricultural country with big estancias, cattle and grain. And it doesn't draw, those things don't draw the criminal class quite the way oil deposits do.
Yeah, absolutely. The resource curse is very true in many ways. If a country has massive resources, then being in charge of the government just means being in charge of a ton of money and a ton of resources. So all the smartest and least scrupulous people out there want to get into government. But the blessing of being in a bankrupt country is that there's not much of a pot of gold at the end of the government rainbow, and so entrepreneurial people at least go and do other things.
And another thing I might point out is if you're a foreigner, the government, if they know you exist, tends to want to treat you a little bit better so that you stay there and bring capital and spend money. So it's perverse. They draw in rich foreigners while they scare away rich natives. It's perverse.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I follow things in Lebanon relatively a bit closely, and I think there's an interesting case there because on the one hand, they don't have oil or gas or any kind of natural resource income, so they're similar to Argentina in that regard. But they're different from Argentina in a way that's even interesting, that makes them even better from the perspective you were mentioning, which is that they have no way of reaching an agreement with the IMF anytime soon. It doesn't look like they ever will. And so while in Argentina there's no big oil money to get as a president, there's big IMF money. If you become president of Argentina, you get to sign a deal with the IMF and you get to have $40 billion that you can hand out to your cronies, win elections, get to staff bureaucracies with your loyalists. So it's a very big jackpot, and obviously the way it works in Argentina, and Argentina is really the poster child for IMF dysfunctional relationship, because every 5 to 10 years they get a new bailout from the IMF. They devalue the currency. They get a ton of new dollars. They get a new president, new prime minister, new finance minister. They get a whole new bunch of buzzwords about, we're going to replace this guy with this, and we're going to start doing this, and we're going to do that, and this is going to be inclusive growth, and this is going to be human rights, and now it's going to be free market reform, and now we're going to do tax reform. But they all lead in the same way, which is that the people in power benefit. The ruling politicians, the Peronists, get a big cake that they split up between them. And then, of course, the bill is handed down to the people in the form of debt that they have to pay back over generations. Well, it's interesting because Lebanon is providing an example of a country that doesn't have that option. So it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out over the next few years, because even though there's a lot to be pessimistic about, but I think that point that you mentioned, which is that there's just not enough money in the government, makes for a better situation. People just don't care about what's going on with the Lebanese government anymore. It's a bankrupt government, and there's just not much they can do. So less conflict happens in these situations.
Yeah, a country like Argentina that has large continuing income from its farms means that there's still lots of money to steal. Like the previous president, she's the vice president now, Christina Kirchner. It's fairly certain that she stole about $10 billion. That's a lot of money by anybody's standards. And, the stories about steamer trunks full of $100 bills and all this type of thing being thrown over the fence at midnight circulate throughout Argentina. But they keep reelecting her because she's got a good rap, and the country's just become totally corrupted with the virus of socialism. But maybe in Argentina, I don't know, in Lebanon or a lot of other countries, maybe it's going to change, because there's a politician in Argentina. He's an economist named Javier Milei, and he's a genuine bona fide ANCAP. I haven't spoken to him because my Spanish is substandard, and his English is even worse than my Spanish. But the interesting thing about Milei is he absolutely speaks his mind very eloquently on all the media, and his support is coming from the younger generation. So there's room to be encouraged in Argentina, which also has by far the best classical liberal tradition in all of Latin America. So there's always hope. But I've got to tell you, Saif, I'm a pessimist as far as the way the world in general is going. And I think that people that think the way we do, we're on the wrong side of history. We're only a rounding error. And the bad guys have been winning for many decades, and they're picking up the pace. The descent of world economies into the bottomless pit is accelerating, actually, led by the U.S., where actual Jacobins are in control in Washington, D.C. So I'm not optimistic. I'd like to be, but at least for the next decade, I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very not optimistic until Bitcoin came into my life and changed everything. So I strongly recommend that you let Bitcoin into your heart, and you will stay.
Well, listen, I'm a believer in Bitcoin. I really am. I was a late adopter to it, idiotically. And the reason I was a late adopter to it was that I analyzed its use is as money. Okay, I got that. So what I did is I looked at the characteristics of a good money. not hard to do because Aristotle defined them in the 4th century BC. And here's where I went wrong in not getting into Bitcoin earlier, where a lot of my friends got into it like in 2012 or something like that. I said, is it durable? Yeah, it's durable as long as the electrical grid stays up, so it's fine. In a different way, it's as good as gold that way. It's divisible. Well, infinitely divisible, even more than gold. So, yep, another characteristic of good money. I mean, durability. That's why we don't use wheat as money, because it doesn't last long. Divisible. That's why we don't use artwork as money. Can't make change for the Mona Lisa. Third characteristic, convenient. That's why we don't use lead as money. It takes too much to be of value. Well, Bitcoin's fine that way. Consistent. That's why we don't use real estate as money. I mean, the French tried that after the revolution. It turned out to be an idiotic idea. So Bitcoin is fine from that point of view. But the last thing, and this is what threw me off, it's got to have value in itself. It's got to be usable so you don't get stuck holding the bag. And it took me a long time too long, until 2017 actually, to figure out, wait, the main use of Bitcoin is as a fungible international money. And that way it's even better than gold. And actually there's a sixth reason that Aristotle didn't come up with, is that it can't be created out of thin air, which wasn't a consideration for him, because that was
Exactly.
before paper.
Because there was no Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen back in his day.
Yeah, so Bitcoin is excellent that way. And since then, I've been a believer. I guess, what was it back in 2017? It was like
2017 was a wild year. It went from about 1,000 at the turn of the year to about 17,000 by the end of the year.
That's right. And I
19,000.
got on the train in like July, so I didn't get in at the bottom. But I'm trying to build a position in it just because I think the argument for it going higher is good. I mean, we both know that, what is it? There's a maximum of 22 or 23 million that can.
21.
Yeah. But how many Bitcoins have been lost with people losing their computers, or, losing the codes, or God knows what? How many? I mean, the real number's got to be probably not like 15 or 16 million. I'm just guessing wildly.
Could be, yeah.
I mean, I know people that, cry in their beer about having lost hundreds of thousands or many, many millions of Bitcoin because of all kinds of stupid reasons.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. Ultimately, it's the scarcity that is the driver of this, and I think that's a very astute point, and it's something that slowed down my ability to just make the jump and understand that Bitcoin can work. And I think a lot of people from the Austrian perspective might be stuck at this point, which is that it's even though the Austrians in particular, specifically continue to repeat the idea that money is just another good, it's another market good, and it can be provided on the market. There's this mental block because of gold having uses other than its role as money. You just assume that it would have to have other uses as money. And it doesn't, in the same sense that your car doesn't have to have another use as a house. Your house doesn't have to have another use as the town's bomb shelter. It can just be a house, and that's what it does. And in fact, the vast majority of goods are specialized goods that just do their job. Your bed is a bed, your TV is a TV. It has a job, but it does it. And money is no different. There's no reason why money should have some other part-time job on the side. And I think a key thing here is that, for many, from the market perspective, says that we want money to be a market good. So it therefore follows that it has to have a role in a market as another good doing something else. But that market role as a money could just be that it is money. It doesn't need to have something else.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, there was one other thing that I think Bitcoin has done that is really astounding and really excellent. And that is that it has caused a lot of people, especially young people, that really didn't think anything about monetary theory to pay attention to monetary theory. And now people talk about Bitcoin and fiat money, which is quite correct, but people never used to refer to the US dollar as fiat money in the past. It was considered the real deal, the numeraire. But now it's just seen as paper because of Bitcoin. And it's introduced a whole generation to a better understanding of economics and monetary theory. It was a breakthrough, I think, in that way.
Oh, absolutely. I think, yeah, I think it's entirely down to Bitcoin that so many people go around using the term fiat. That it's a term that's been resurrected. That nobody understood fiat. They successfully managed to call government scrip as money, and people had just assumed that the psyop was complete. The green pieces of paper are money, and that's it. And now we've taken the term away from them. No, money is a name that's up for grabs now again. And your pieces of paper and your digital slave script that's at the central bank is just one kind of money, and it's a particularly bad one. It's fiat money. It's money by decree. It's money because somebody says it's money. Whereas gold is money because people want to buy it. It's a free market money. Bitcoin is a free market money. It's money that people buy because they want as money, whereas fiat money has to be forced down people's throat in order for them to accept it, in order for them to have to use it. So I think this is an enormous shifting of the Overton window when it comes to money. I absolutely agree with you. Doesn't Bitcoin make you optimistic overall in general?
Does Bitcoin make me optimistic overall in general? No.
Yeah.
No. And
Why
the
not?
reason why is that if we look at this from a historical point of view, well, we can look at the US government, but it's true of all governments all around the world. If we go back to the beginning of the 19th century, the total income of the US government was from import duties and excise taxes and very few other things. So they had a rather minimal impact on the way people produced and consumed, and money was gold. It worked very well before the Federal Reserve and the income tax is concerned. But now, let's say from the US government having just a couple of percent or whatever of the economy, it's 30. And I don't believe the government's own figures, quite frankly. I trust them. The US government's figures just slightly more than I trust the Argentine government's figures. It's gone from a few percent up to 30, 40%, something on that order. And it's growing rapidly. I mean, since the Jacobins were installed in office back in 2020, they're printing up dollars by the trillions, by the trillions. And this is going to create huge distortions. And here's what's going to happen. Because of these trillions of dollars that have been printed up, most of which have gone into the hands of the bad guys, people that are connected to the state, and that's not a good thing. But it's creating gigantic, even bigger distortions in the economy. And when this game comes to an end in a catastrophic depression, I call it the Greater Depression, because this depression that we're heading towards is going to be much worse and much longer lasting and much different than what happened from 1929 to 1946. So what's going to happen in the US anyway, I think, is that since the average guy has been so corrupted and relies so much on the government and believes in the government, they're all going to cry for a strong man to kiss things and make it better. We need a new Roosevelt, they'll say, something like that. And it's going to, and we're going to get somebody really awful. I think a military guy, because the military is the only institution in America that is still kind of trusted. So that's what I see. Assuming we have elections in 2024, I think the economy will be in free fall. That's what's going to happen. And it's hard to recover from that without a total collapse.
All right, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here a little bit, and I mean, people like us, Austrians and gold bugs. A lot of us have been saying this since 1971. And realistically, I wasn't alive in 1971, but if I looked back, if knowing what I know now about how the world works and what I understand about money, in 1971, after Nixon said we're removing the link between gold and the dollar, I would have expected there'd be a collapse then, or within a year or two or three. And to be fair, there was effectively a collapse. There was enormous inflation through the 1970s. And the ounce of gold went from $35 to $800 through the 1970s. So that was like a 20x, more than 20x. So that's a huge, essentially. I mean, it wasn't that the price of gold went up, and the value of gold remained relatively constant in terms of real goods and services, but the price of goods and services, like the price of gold, went up enormously because the dollar collapsed. And by the end of the 70s, it looked like things were terrible. And, people by the 1980 were expecting all kinds of collapse. And you wrote your book in 1980 on crisis investing. And it did look like this was going to be the case. But I mean, here we are. It's been 43 years, or if we want to say 52, since the 52 years since Nixon took it off. Why can't it be another 10, another 20? They seem to just keep managing to kick the can down the road. 87, people thought this was the end of it. 92, 93, 98 with the Russian crisis and the East Asian crisis. Everybody thought this was it. And yet, it's like a zombie. It doesn't matter how many times you shoot it; it just keeps getting back up, and goes back to hacking at human society and destroying people's lives again and again and again and again. And then, of course, there was the dot-com bubble. There was the 2008 crisis. There was the COVID crisis. All of those things keep coming and keep going, and here we are. It's been 3 years since they printed trillions, and yes, there's been some inflation. But one point that I make in the Fiat Standard is that maybe there just isn't going to be a big giant crash. Maybe this is just going to continue in the same situation, in the same kind of dynamic, wherein the money is devaluing every year by about 5 to 10% in real terms. Assets keep going up. The poor get poorer. The top 1%, 2% continue to get richer. Governments continue to get bigger. But I think the difference is, and a point that I make in why this is the case is that all these crises are, in a sense, self-correcting to the bigger failure of the fiat currency system, because the fiat currency system creates money out of debt. And then when there's a crisis, you get a collapse in the debt. So you get a collapse in the money supply. And so that prevents inflation from going so bad. So it's not like we're doing 10% a year per year, every year. We're doing, say, 5-10% inflation per year. But every 7 or 8 years or so, you get a year with negative inflation because there was a big crisis and there was big liquidation. And so that's pretty significant. You're not adding up 10% every year. There comes a year where you get a negative 15% or something like that. And then that takes things back down. And then you start all over again and again and again. So maybe this just isn't going to be a crisis. Maybe there isn't going to be a crisis. I mean, when a crisis happens, people run to the dollar. The dollar gets stronger and stronger, and then that just allows the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve to pick the survivors from any particular crisis. And of course, they pick the people that they like, and they don't pick the people that they don't like. So they come out of every crisis stronger.
Well, no, you're quite correct. But I think perhaps first we ought to start off with the definition of the word depression, because that's what I am predicting. And there are a number of ways we can define that word, but the best broad general definition is it's a period of time when most people's standard of living drops significantly. And even by the government's own figures, the standard of living of the average working American has been slipping for many years. But why hasn't it been worse? I think there are two reasons. One is that human beings are wired like squirrels in many ways. We like to gather nuts, which is to say, we like to produce. It's it's genetically part of our character, number one. So, and we tend to save that production that builds capital. So even if it's not very productive, capital goes up every year. Point number one. Point number two is technology, certainly for the last 200 and something years, has been compounding almost at the rate of Moore's Law. And add that to the capital, and despite the stupidity of government, their wars, their persecutions, their taxation, their confiscations, their inflation, the economy's done better and better, more buildings and more roads. Okay, but this could come to an end. I'm asking myself, throughout history, there was a dark age that descended upon the Eastern Mediterranean, which was the center of world civilization at the collapse of the Bronze Age, about 1200 BC. And then another dark age descended upon the West in the early 400s, really. I mean, 476, collapse of Rome, which was a good thing in many ways. But then things got grim. And I'm just wondering, and I don't know if you've thought about this much, is it possible, because of the fact that the world is resting on so much technology and supply chains from around the world, and governments have become so much more virulent, is it possible that all this will collapse and it's going to be really, really hard to reassemble, and we could go into something that resembles another dark age? What do you think of that?
I gotta say, I mean, if it wasn't for Bitcoin, I would be very, very optimistic. Sorry, I would be very pessimistic. And in the fact, this is, I know you've been reading my latest book, Principles of Economics, and this is kind of the central question on which I end the book, which is that, in the book, I explain how people economize, how people accumulate capital, and how the capitalist economy leads to the development of civilization. And this is what allows us to have the quality of life that we have right now. And this entire edifice rests on a foundation of secure property rights, and rests on a foundation of money, and a functioning hard money that people can use, that can trust, and they can save with into the future. So you undo any of these foundations, and then the entire structure begins to crack, and then you could expect the whole thing to fall apart. And civilizations have risen and fallen before, so I would not be entirely surprised if this was the case. However, I think we also just keep getting better at technology, and I think Bitcoin really is the technological way in which we find a way around this. And I think the way that I look at it is, fiat money is the short-circuiting of human civilization. It's like a failure mode where something bad happens, and then the money stops operating properly, and then all of society falls apart, and people don't quite understand. People in Zimbabwe or in Weimar Republic, they don't quite understand how things collapse. They just see everything falling apart around them, and they don't understand why that is the case. But really, it's like pulling that screw that is money, and you pull that one screw out of a machine, and the whole machine falls apart. And the reason why I think Bitcoin is such a big deal is precisely because it allows us to continue to have markets, to continue to have money, to continue to have sophisticated economic calculation, as I describe it in the book, to continue to have all the sophisticated layers of the edifices of human civilization that rest on money, all can continue to operate because we have Bitcoin, regardless of whatever governments do. And so, in a sense, I think the reason to be optimistic is that the fiat money is going to continue to lose value over time. The government-based part of the economy is going to become a smaller fraction of the economy over time, because more and more productive people are going to move over to Bitcoin, and more people who suffer the problems of fiat money are going to move over to Bitcoin. And so, in a sense, what Bitcoin offers is something that none of these societies ever had before, which is a monetary escape hatch. You couldn't do that. You couldn't just, imagine if they had Bitcoin in Rome, things would have been very different. People would have opted out, centuries before Rome fell apart, the people of Rome would have opted out of Bitcoin, and then they would have ended the inflation that was destroying their economy, and things would have been back to normal relatively. So, and of course, that brings us to another point, which is that it was 400 years of inflation before before Rome fell. More than 400 years, I think, since the first time they started debasing the currency until the barbarians stormed the gates of the city. It was more than 4 centuries.
Yeah, it started about with Nero, and yeah, more or less.
People usually say, Rome was not built in a day, but they also forget that Rome was not destroyed in a day either. So it takes a long time for these things to take place. So we could, this could continue for another century or two, for all we know. But the difference is that now we have this escape hatch, which I think is what makes me optimistic, because...
Well, it's a monetary escape hatch, and that's very important. But, if the state really becomes overweening, and they'll come up with all kinds of nonsensical and criminal reasons why they need more power to solve the problem that they caused, there'll still be, Bitcoin will be a big plus, that's true. And I'm a big believer in owning a lot of gold coins, also silver coins, in the safest place you can think of as a supplement. Both things are important. But, with their regulations, they're going to slow down commerce a lot. They're going to keep misallocating capital. They're going to make it, and I'm not sure that the average guy is going to pick up on Bitcoin the way he should, because right now, the average guy, I don't care where he is in the world, if he tries to get ahead and save, what's he do? He's got his national currency. That's really all the average guy has. And he tries to save these kwaches or pulas or pesos or whatever kind of crap the government issues. And they lose value every year at 5, 10, 15, 20%. And he just can't get ahead. And I'm not sure Bitcoin is going to be adopted widely enough by the man in the street to save him, in addition to the fact that the man in the street not only doesn't understand economics, but it's worse. What economics he does understand is completely phony and backwards. So that I don't know. I don't think we can rely on Bitcoin alone to stop the downward trend of civilization, because there's so many other elements: taxes, property rights, understanding of the way the world works, and it's all getting worse, I think.
Yeah, definitely plenty to be depressed about, but in my monomania, I continue to convince myself that all of the bad things are downstream from fiat money. The money printer is what allows bad things to be very bad. Before the money printer, you could have bad governments, they could do terrible things, but the extent of how terrible they are has always been limited by the fact that they would run out of gold. And so fiat came and suspended this natural order and made it so that bad ideas don't have to die, because governments can just keep printing money. So for as long as society has any savings, government can continue to print money. It can continue to take the wealth stored in people's money and use it to finance its dumb ideas. The only end point is essentially complete economic collapse, where all of the society's capital is destroyed, as we saw in Zimbabwe or in Venezuela. And this is the case because there is no alternative. There is no use. There's nothing that you could use other than the national currency. But now, because there is an alternative, and at some point, yes, you're right, maybe people won't get it because people are brainwashed. People don't have the clarity to sit and spend a couple of hours to understand why Bitcoin matters. But Bitcoin isn't relying on winning popularity contests. Bitcoin is essentially like any technology. It wins because it rewards people who adopt it and it punishes people who don't. So, people got into the car relatively quickly once they realized that if they don't get into the car, people who have cars are just going to lap you in every endeavor.
Well, no, you're right. And on the bright side, I mean, to add to what you're saying, is that as all these stupid governments come out with their central bank digital currencies, which they're doing now, I think, people will see that these things are actually going to make things worse. And as they get used to using them, they'll say, wait a minute, there must be a better way. So I think they're going to shoot themselves in the foot. More people will go to Bitcoin once they become familiar and start using these CBDCs. So, that's, I mean, they're disastrous, these CBDCs, but on the bright side, and there's always a silver lining, it will draw people's attention further to Bitcoin, the masses, I think. I hate to
Yeah,
use terms like the masses. It's so Marxist, but it's accurate.
yeah. You mentioned gold and silver. Are you still a gold and silver bull?
Yeah, very, very much. Because if you, as you pointed out earlier, if you clock the general price level and you compare the general price level, whether that's a suit of clothes or a meal or property or whatever you want, to the price of gold, you find that gold is reasonably priced at the moment. It's not too cheap. It's not too dear. But I think that even though looking at it from a speculator's point of view, it's just reasonably priced, I think we're going to see such a period of financial chaos in the future. There's going to be a panic into gold because, with the exception of Bitcoin, it's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. With the risk of having to trust somebody else being so high in a world that's full of debt, I think there's going to be a panic into gold. And I think it'll happen with Bitcoin too. So I'm bullish on Bitcoin. I think it's going higher for much the same reason that gold is going higher, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I was a big gold bug, but with every passing day that gold doesn't shoot to the moon, I lose a little bit of the faith, and I become more and more of a Bitcoin believer. And I think if you look at it, I think there's a good case to be made that silver has been demonetized, and that gold might be on its path to demonetization as well. In the Bitcoin Standard, I discussed this. So, but back in 1870, when half the world, or close to half the world, was still on a silver standard. At that point, the ratio between the two, 1 ounce of gold could buy you about 14 ounces of silver. Today, the ratio is closer to 100. So if silver's gone from 14 ounces per ounce of gold to around 100. I haven't checked recently, but it's
Yeah.
somewhere in that range.
Yeah. Say right now, silver is around 24 and gold is it's around 1950. So what is that? I'm trying to do the
Yeah.
math in my head. 90 to 1 or something.
80 or something like that, 80 or 90, something in that range. So it's been a decline in the real value of silver. And if you think about it over the long term, I mean, it's if you measure it against the dollar has been declining. So silver has effectively been losing value because it's basically constant in terms of the dollar. And I think this just shows that, remember we were discussing earlier the other uses of money. I think silver is an illustration of the fact that when the other uses of money, the other uses of money are a problem, and the bigger they are, the less of a money you are. So at this point, it does not look to me like silver is money in any meaningful sense. A lot of people have large quantities of physical silver stashed away as money, but effectively, these are utterly inconsequential in terms of the overall supply of silver, because the overall supply of silver is determined on the industrial market. There's production, there's consumption, and the stuff that goes into industrialization, in my mind, is consumed. Is no longer monetary silver. You can't use it for settling debt. It's not in the form of a coin or a bar or pure silver that you could use for settling debt. It's in a laptop, it's in a TV screen, it's in a phone, and so it's effectively been like it's been buried back into the ground. So it's taken out of the existing monetary stockpiles. So therefore, it's making the stock to flow ratio for silver drop even lower and lower and lower. In other words, for industrial metals, the stock to flow ratio is close to 1, meaning that new production is always roughly in the range of existing stockpiles because you're constantly consuming the stockpiles. What distinguishes a monetary metal is that people hold it for its own sake. And so the stockpiles accumulate. And so with gold, we had a stock to flow ratio in the 60s. So the stockpile of existing gold was 60 times larger than annual production. And because gold was predominantly not an industrial metal, all of these stockpiles, the more we produce, the more growth in the supply, in the flow, the bigger the stockpiles become. And that helps keep it a monetary metal because the stockpile is not affected by new production. But then the more industrialized it is, the more it gets used in industry, the more the stockpile gets consumed, the less of a monetary metal it becomes. And that's why, with all of this inflation taking place, silver still can't jump. It's just like any other industrial metal. If there's a spike, it's temporary. Something happens that increases demand and supply can't keep up, but then supply catches up. People dig deeper holes, find more silver, dump it on the market. Supply catches up, and it comes back down.
Well,
So
I guess I see silver as a speculative vehicle, but I see it as a reasonably good one because, after all, people can use anything as money. They've used cigarettes as money. They've used cows as money. They've used seashells as money in the past. So, and Bitcoin is a new money, and it's quite a good one. But I think silver is going to retain a certain monetary component, and the fact that it's used industrially, I see that as being a good thing, putting more upward pressure on it. And of course, it's better to live in a deflationary world where your money becomes more valuable every year, from an economic point of view, I'd say, than an inflationary world where your money becomes less valuable every year, simply because that encourages people to save their production. And that's how you become wealthy, is by saving your production. So I think silver's okay as a secondary money. I think it's see. And the other thing with silver is that I'm not sure that production is going to ramp up with much higher silver prices, simply because I forget the exact numbers, but it's something on the order of 90% of all the silver that's mined in the world is a byproduct of pure industrial metals like lead and zinc and copper and gold also. So that it's a byproduct, and no more silver will be produced, really, no matter how high it goes, because they're not going to produce more lead or copper just because silver is higher. It's a trivial portion of the economic return of a mine in 90% of the cases. So I wouldn't be too bearish on silver. I think it's a bargain right now, actually. But will it be used as a money? Well, God, I don't know. I mean, there's so many things that we can't predict. Listen, we don't even know if they're not going to start a nuclear war tomorrow morning. And they might, because they're stupid and evil enough to do exactly that in the Ukraine. So, and if that happens, the metals that you can hold in your own clammy little palms might actually be better than Bitcoin under that circumstance. But I like Bitcoin, especially because it allows you to carry assets across national borders cheaply and secretly. Oh, you're not supposed to say secret. That's become a bad word. Let's say privately. So that's a really big plus for Bitcoin.
yes, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your story, your personal story, how you got into this world. I think there's a lot of value that could be had about by learning about these experiences. So, how did you first get into this world of contrarian anarcho-capitalism investment in the first place? Why not just do the normal thing and do what normal people do?
Well, look, like a lot of kids, I wanted to have money because I could buy a car and do all the wonderful things that you can do if you have some money. So I decided to, gradually, it was a complete waste of time. Well, I'm not going to say a waste of time, it was a total misallocation of time going to college, where I think I majored in economics, but I'm not even sure because it was so irrelevant. Huge misallocation of time and money. But after I got out, I read Henry Hazlitt's book, Economics in One Lesson. I presume you're familiar with that particular book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really brilliant short treatment of economics. And it got me thinking the right way. Then I read, these aren't the only books I read, but they're the ones that stuck in my mind as being important. Ayn Rand's book, The Virtue of Selfishness, which I thought provided an excellent moral foundation, along with the economic foundation. And then, back in those days, I read Harry Brown's book, You Can Profit from the Coming Devaluation, which he wrote in 69 or 70. And I read it and it put the theory into practice. I didn't have any money back then, but I started buying gold. And then I started buying gold stocks, which of course are a leveraged way of playing on gold. Those gold stocks, although I started out from a small base, treated me really well through the whole decade. And of course, once you start understanding gold stocks, the mines are very often in kind of backwater places in the world, South America, Africa. And I started traveling a lot because at this point I've been to 155 different countries, most of them several times. That got me interested in looking at you see a country like the Congo. It should be one of the very richest countries in the world, but it's one of the very poorest countries in the world. So that got me interested as a speculator as well. So that's kind of the way that I progressed. But throughout my life, I've always tried to save as much as I could to build capital. You can't be a capitalist unless you have capital. So that was important. But I like to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So, and that's the problem with a lot of libertarians, incidentally. And I've always been a gut libertarian, although now I'm kind of left libertarianism kind of behind. I'm an anarchist, and libertarianism is political philosophy. It's that I still like going to these backward third world countries, and that led to my hobby for the last 30 some years, which is going to these backward little dog shit countries. And I found I've been quite fortunate in being able to sit down with the rulers of countries. And I like to pitch them on turning their country into an anarcho-capitalist utopia. At first, I was serious about it. Then I started doing it just because it was amusing and a source of great cocktail parties. So I guess that's where I am today. I don't do that anymore because I've kind of been there, done that. But anyway, the markets have been very good to me over the years, despite the fact that I've made a lot of mistakes and I'm quite lazy. And, frankly, if I'd been really smart, I would have glommed on to Warren Buffett back in the 60s. And every dollar that I saved, I would have just put it in Berkshire Hathaway and done something else with my time. But, everything worked out okay.
Yeah. And so, did you spend the majority of the last 40 years traveling around, or were you mostly based in the US until recently?
Well, let me see. One of the few advantageous things about my having gone to college was I took my junior year as an exchange student in Switzerland, and that gave me a chance to see a lot of Europe. So that's when it started. No, I've always just wanted to see the world and the way things worked in foreign countries. So I'm not traveling much anymore because I've kind of been there and done that. And like I said, I'm kind of lazy or have become lazy. So I spend my time, a lot of it here in the US, but probably only 4 months of the year, and the rest in Argentina and Uruguay. which a lot of people are unaware of the fact they're actually very different countries, those two, even though they're just across the Plate River from each other. I don't know. It's so I write about these things. Not that it does any good. It's mostly I find writing is mainly a way to clarify your own thoughts, to see if your thoughts hold together and make sense. It's really helpful to put them on paper. So that's what I do with my time now, and I've gotten into the custom of recently of writing novels. I have a series of 7 novels that I've planned out. The first 3 have been written, taking the history of our kind of ideal man. His name is Charles Knight. First, he's a speculator in the first book. Gets involved in a bush war in Africa and makes a lot of money, has it stolen from him. Second book, he becomes a drug lord. Everybody says, oh, drug lords, bad guys. No, Charles is a good drug lord. Then in the third novel, he's kind of pissed off because they, once again, steal all the money he made. And he becomes assassin because he figures there's some people that just need killing, which I think is true enough. And then the next 4 novels, if they ever get written, will become much more radical than that. So that's kind of what I'm doing now.
Excellent. So, well, we have a question here for you from one of our attendees, Harry, and he's asking, what do you think, what are your thoughts on the BRICS currency? You seem to suggest that you don't think this is serious, and I tend to agree, by the way. But what are your thoughts?
Well, the dollar is on its way out, that's for sure, because they're printing the things up by the trillions. And since the Americans idiotically confiscated many billions of dollars of Russian assets, the world can see you can't trust the dollar, or absolutely can't trust the US government. So everybody wants to get away from the dollar because they might meet the same fate as the Russians did, have all their assets confiscated. So that's where the BRICS currency comes from, of course. And it's nice that they're saying that's going to be backed by gold, but that's kind of a chimera, because why back a currency by gold? You should use gold. I mean, you don't back a currency, you just use gold, period. And the fact that you've got all these unreliable governments, they're all unreliable, but the BRICS, these are third world countries. Who's going to store the gold? I mean, that's a good question. And if it's a currency backed by gold, what's to stop them from inflating it and doing the same thing the U.S. government did? Well, say it's worth so much, but we'll print a bunch more because we can use the money. So the answer to the question is, yeah, it'll look good at first because, and it's a step in the right direction. At least it's associating these fiat currencies with gold, but it'll blow up. So I have no interest in the BRICS currency.
No, I agree entirely. I think the entire thing is going to serve as a very edifying lesson for a lot of bureaucrats in these countries to actually learn economics and learn monetary economics, because I like to call it de-dollarization by press release. Like you read some of these press releases and it's, the foreign minister of this country met the foreign minister of that country, and they agreed that they're going to stop using the dollar for trade amongst themselves, and that they're going to just, wish this thing away. And then, sometimes they say, all right, we're just going to trade using our own currencies, which then obviously puts it the very awkward question of, all right, which one of our 2 currencies? Because we have 2.
Right.
And then,
Sure.
you're dealing with, say, India and Saudi Arabia. What use does Saudi Arabia have for Indian rupees, and what use does the Indian government have for Saudi riyals? Very little use. I mean, yes, they trade with one another, but at the end of the day, what matters is the cash balance that they keep. And so neither of them has a reason to keep a cash balance in the other one's country, because no other country in the other one's currency, because no other country accepts that currency. You can't use the Saudi or the Indian money to pay Russia or Brazil or Iran or the US. Nobody wants these things. So you're not going to keep the money of somebody else just because you want to get rid of the dollar. And even if they do denominate their trades in whatever currency they want, ultimately in their cash balances, what they're all holding is treasuries, They're all holding dollars. They're all holding treasuries because that's the biggest, most liquid market. That's the one they can come in and out of with most volume. That's the one that you want to be in if you have massive, massive volume, massive size. You want to be able to get in and out of the market without causing the market to slip and without you yourself being the cause of you getting a bad price for it. So it's very easy for them to talk about it, but there's no solution for it as long as they're dealing with, as long as they try and make it work with their own currencies, it's unworkable. And so the only way out of that is to make it work with gold. But and then that's the second lesson. So first of all, they'll learn why their own money can't work. They'll understand the problem of coincidence of wants, and then hopefully won't take them 5 years to get that lesson. It'll hopefully happen faster. Then we get to lesson number 2, which is why gold. And then when they try and make it work with gold, they're going to realize, oh no, we can't just give them a bunch of gold at the end of the year. If we're going to be trading with other countries with gold, we are effectively going on a gold standard. If we are doing that, if we're trading rupees for reals with gold, the only way to do that is to have an exchange rate between the two, and for both governments to be effectively redeeming their currency for gold, because that's what they're doing. They're doing it amongst themselves. So the only way to do that is, if you want to go gold to solve that initial problem, is to go on a gold standard. Now, if you think the Chinese, Russian, Iranian, Indian governments are likely to go on a gold standard, I think you haven't been paying any attention to it. I think it's just completely fanciful thinking for people who don't like the dollar. And I know there are a lot of very good reasons for not liking the dollar, but to imagine that we could get a gold standard from these countries, I think is completely fanciful. And I think the reason that it is fanciful is that, here we are, they've been talking about this stuff for years now. We hear absolutely nothing whatsoever about any of those countries actually building a single facility for the settlement of physical gold with another country. I'll take all of this stuff seriously, not if they show me, all these amazing press releases, or if they organize a conference with all of the BRICS countries where they all stand together holding hands. None of that matters. Show me one facility in Brazil where they're saying, hey, this is how we're going to be trading gold with the rest of the world. The gold is going to come in here, and then we check it there, and then we put it here, and we do that. And once they start talking the logistics of moving physical gold around, I'll start taking this seriously. But once they do get into those logistics, if they do take that extra step of going on a gold standard and beginning to use gold for trade, then it's time for the third major lesson these bureaucrats are going to get into, which is why Bitcoin and not gold. And the reason is they're going to realize how enormously expensive and complicated it is to safely and reliably move gold internationally, because it's expensive to lug around, because it's heavy metal, but also, more importantly, because it's very expensive to verify. The only way that you can verify gold bar is original is you have to melt the whole thing down and recast it, which is very expensive. So once they do that, once they realize how expensive it is, and once they realize just how much room for cheating there is, that's when I believe they will have learned the lesson of why Bitcoin. Then it's going to become clear why Bitcoin.
That's a good point, Saif, and that's why, incidentally, why I believe in the gold coin standard, not just the gold standard, because gold coins are much easier to deal with than gold bars. But speaking of Bitcoin with these governments, are you following closely, or I'm sure you are, what's going on in El Salvador, which, as far as I was concerned, was the least likely country to do anything intelligent in Latin America? And so what's going on? How are they proceeding with their legitimization of Bitcoin in El Salvador?
I am quite familiar with it. Actually, I was in El Salvador just a couple of months ago. And I was appointed by the president. I met the president, Nayib Bukele, and he appointed me as an economic advisor for their Bitcoin office. So I got to say, I think they've been doing an incredible job, primarily with the issue of fighting crime, which is just absolutely mind-blowing. You go to the country there, and the whole country feels like people who have been released from prison. Like the whole country is is run down and being renovated, and it feels like it was run down because it was deserted, and it was deserted because nobody walked in the streets because it was all unsafe. You were getting extorted by gangs all the time. Life was very cheap. Murder was very common. It was the most violent place in the world. Nobody played soccer in the street. Nobody played basketball in the street. Now all of these things are returning, so life is coming back. So definitely, in terms of the security, I think they performed a miracle there, and that's it's no wonder Bukele is the most popular president in the world because there isn't anywhere in the world where people wouldn't trade anything for the safety that if you lived in El Salvador in 2010 and you were told 2022 you're going to have this crime level that we have in 2022, you'd give pretty much anything for that. So people are quite happy with it. The Bitcoin part of the experiment, I think, is going well, but I think it takes time. A lot of people in Bitcoin and outside of Bitcoin, a lot of people have a very high time preference in that they want things to just happen immediately. So Bitcoiners, many of them would be disappointed that not everybody in El Salvador is using Bitcoin, and some people get disappointed that you go to a coffee shop and sometimes they don't want to take your Bitcoin. And for me, that doesn't really matter. The idea that the government can just mandate a currency top down, I don't think really works. People need to build up cash balances in the currency, trust it, understand it, and be willing to hold it, and then they'll start accepting it. Other than that, if they don't want to hold a cash balance in it, then all that you're doing by accepting it is just incurring more transaction fees.
You want to hazard a guess as to what you think Bitcoin might ultimately be worth?
I think ultimately here's the operative word. Ultimately, I think Bitcoin survives beyond all other monies you can measure it with. This is the end game. Is there is no price of Bitcoin because anything you can price Bitcoin with is no longer there. I mean, there'll be prices of things denominated in Bitcoin, and I expect to see these prices of things always forever continue to drop. Everything's just going to continue to get cheaper in Bitcoin terms forever because we can make more of everything, but we can't make more of Bitcoin. So there's going to be more cars, more homes, more dollars, more apples, oranges, bananas, everything. We're going to have more of everything. But there's never going to be more than 21 million Bitcoin. So I think it's just deflation forever. It's, well, maybe not deflation is the right term. Price deflation, I should say. It's just a constant decline in prices forever. That's what Bitcoin is. There's no end point to this because we just keep making more of other stuff while Bitcoin stays at 21 million.
And that's an ideal situation, as we've discussed before. I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, for El Salvador, I think it's going to be another few years before the Bitcoin bet really pays off, which is good. They're taking it easy. They didn't just go all in on Bitcoin. And then, with the volatility, that could be very dangerous. So they're doing very well economically. A lot of people thought they were going to default. They're not defaulting. And they're stacking more Bitcoin. So I think with time, as Bitcoin appreciates more and more, what I think is the real jackpot here for El Salvador would be that, you know, if you can build a cash balance, if you can build an international cash account in Bitcoin that continues to grow in value with Bitcoin, rather than holding US bonds and foreign government bonds, which is what most governments do. And these things obviously are built to collapse in value over time, to drop in value over time, forcing you to constantly borrow from the IMF. That's how the scam works. You hold the treasuries in order to trade with the rest of the world to back your currency, and then that continues to get devalued because the dollar is getting devalued, and so you need to keep borrowing from the IMF. And borrowing is better for you because at least you're short the currency that's getting devalued rather than being long the currency that's getting devalued. So that's how the cycle of fiat works. And the way to break out of this, in my opinion, is to accumulate bitcoins which appreciate over time, and then having a positive cash balance in Bitcoin, and then not having to worry about borrowing from lending sharks like loan sharks like the IMF and the World Bank. I think that's really that's the long term prize for a country like El Salvador. I think they can show the way of how you can become financially sovereign, break out of the IMF and World Bank global slavery system, and get rich doing so.
Well, with a little bit of luck, the IMF and the World Bank will both go bankrupt and experience massive defaults.
The IMF has got, I think, 3,000 tons of gold. The IMF has. Even if the dollar collapses, they're still around for a while.
Yeah, a pity,
Pity, yeah.
because they are not a force for good in the world.
But they don't have any Bitcoin.
Well, and that's a good thing from a speculator's point of view, because that means the only thing they can do is buy some.
Hopefully not. I mean, hopefully they continue to fight it, and then they sink into institutional irrelevancy. Bitcoin appreciates. Bitcoin-denominated financial assets and companies and currencies continue to appreciate over time, and dollar and gold-denominated organizations like the IMF and the world central banks continue to increase in irrelevance. I think that's the peaceful way we unwind the fiat Ponzi and replace it with something that works.
Well, I like that idea. And as they say, from your mouth to God's ears.
Yes, I should send you a copy of the Fiat Standard, my second book. You'll like it because that's what it discusses.
Well, I heard that book was translated into 36 different languages. That is formidable.
No, that's the Bitcoin Standard. That's my first book.
Ah,
Fiat Standard's at about 12, but yeah, you should read the Bitcoin Standard definitely too. Yeah. We have a very good common friend, Nick, who introduced us. I'm sure he has some extra copies lying around. I'll let him give you some.
I'll let him know, because he spends most of his time in Argentina at this
Yeah.
point. He likes it very much. But what do you think of the countries in the world? If you had to plant a flag and live in one, any country kind of attracts your attention for whatever reason right now?
I think really two choices. One is El Salvador for the reasons that I mentioned. I think it's Bitcoin is one of those reasons, and also the security and the fact that the entire country is so united behind the president, and that the president is so clearly not a sociopath, which is a pretty remarkable thing to be for a global leader these days.
Very unusual, right?
Very unusual. I mean, I met him and I spoke to him and spoke to some of his brothers. They really actually care about the country, and they don't care about increasing their wealth or exploiting the country. They're doing really well. I think one unique thing about El Salvador is that it's one place where you see people are optimistic about the future. You don't see that pretty much anywhere. Like if you go to the US, pretty much all anybody talks about is problems, bad things. It's economic, it's social, it's political, it's racial, whatever it is. People are just generally angry and upset and pessimistic. That's really the key thing. They're pessimistic. They don't think tomorrow is going to be better than today. I think this is so prevalent all over the world. Everywhere you go, you just hear people complaining and people having a growing conviction that tomorrow is going to be worse than today. El Salvador is the opposite of that. And I think perhaps a second choice is the Gulf, the Arab Gulf. I think the Arab Gulf is becoming a remarkable destination today because, in terms of economics, I think when you travel there, it's the gap between them and the rest of the world is becoming quite significant in terms of wealth. I mean, back in the day, the Arab wealth, Gulf wealth has always been something of a joke, but it was mostly wealth that was concentrated in the hands of the ruling family and their close families and associates. But now, if you go to a Gulf country, I mean, you truly see an advanced first world city. In fact, I think one truly astounding moment for me was last year. A journalist I know, her name is Natalie Brunel. She's a Bitcoin journalist, great journalist. She's based in LA, and she traveled to a conference in Dubai. And she was posting pictures from the conference in Dubai and seeing all those amazing things that she was seeing in Dubai. And she made a tweet saying, I've come a long way. I used to work in American TV and I traveled to dinky little motels all over America. And now here I am in this fancy, amazing 7-star hotel in Dubai. And she's posting pictures. And for me, that was a really striking moment because in the 1980s, when I was a kid, we lived in Saudi Arabia. we'd travel from Saudi Arabia to Europe or the US, and it felt like going from a third world country to a first world country. Like you'd be amazed at entering New York. A 6 year old kid goes into New York from Saudi Arabia. Yeah, you've gone to the big city. You've gone from third world to first world. You've gone from backwards to advanced. And now it's the exact opposite. It was that tweet by my friend Natalie that really brought it home to me. Like when I went to LA in the 1980s, LA was LA, and now LA is a dump, and
Yeah,
it's
sure.
got tent cities all over. It's extremely dangerous. It's somewhere I would not want to take my family to live there, and it's massively dysfunctional in so many different ways. The grid is failing in LA. Infrastructure is falling apart, and all kinds of horrible things are happening there. That people who live in LA, when they go to the Gulf now, they look at it as if it is the place to be. And
I know when I first went to Dubai, actually, I just visited the airport the first time. And that airport in Dubai, when I first went there, was about the size of the airport in Aspen, Colorado. It was a little airport, and it was nothing. And now it's one of the biggest airports in the world, and it's incredible what's happened in Dubai. I mean, it's absolutely breathtaking. It dwarfs anything, even what's happened in China. What do you think about what's going on in Saudi Arabia, just across the Gulf? Do you think that Prince Salman's, I mean, it seems like he's putting too much emphasis on the state with his 10 miles or however many miles long city and so forth. This is all government capital. And I've got a feeling it's going to end badly for that reason.
Yeah, I must say I'm not very up close on the economics of what is happening in Saudi Arabia. Although, as well, I mean, Dubai is perhaps the most obvious to the West, but Saudi Arabia also in the last few years has just been an incredible transformation, and Qatar as well. I think people who don't follow football don't quite appreciate what an absolute miracle the World Cup was last year for Qatar, because this is the first time that anyone has ever been able to host a whole World Cup in one city. And this is something that I don't think anybody in the whole world could afford to do, because, for the next World Cup, they're going to be hosting it across the US and Canada and Mexico. So three countries which have a combined population of something like 500 million people are going to combine together to provide enough stadia and infrastructure to host a World Cup, which was hosted in one city in the Gulf. So that city, Doha, which is the capital of Qatar, had 9 football stadia and had all the infrastructure to get tens of thousands of fans in and out of these stadia, and it worked seamlessly. And of course, the other thing that we should mention, it's not just all glitz and fancy things and money. The most remarkable thing today about the Gulf is that it is safe. It's incredibly safe. It's unbelievably safe in a way that most Westerners cannot even comprehend. You could leave money on the street, and if anybody picks it up, they'll pick it up to report it. It's incredibly safe, and that's what a civilized place should be. People have normalized the idea that cities are just zoos, but that's not what a city is. A city should be a place that is safer than the wild. It's where humans come to be safe from crime and from depredations of nature. So I think economically, I think the Gulf is just making leaps way beyond the rest of the world. If you look at what Saudi Arabia is doing now, it's just enormous, just in terms of football. I mean, they're overnight, the government started investing in the soccer clubs in Saudi Arabia. Now this is the first time this has ever happened, that someone is buying the top stars of Europe out of Europe. And this has never happened before. It's always all the best players in the world go to Europe. And now the best players in Europe are being bought by the Saudis, and they're being paid enormous amounts of money. So it's truly remarkable. You're correct on the idea of it being state-led. But I think one thing to keep in mind here is probably, the example of Chinese industrialization. So China's had an economic miracle over the past 4 decades. A lot of it was state-led, but it still works because it's a huge improvement over the state-led kind of economic growth that you had in the 60s and 70s, wherein the government was very top-down, and you had mass starvation, tens of millions of people dying. So it's a matter of degrees, perhaps. So in the sense, there is a lot of state direction, but there's also a lot of liberalization and private enterprise that is taking part in this. I don't know about this NEOM, this 17-mile city. It seems like it's a horrible idea, and it seems like it's going to fall apart, and it's not going to work very well. And it seems, I mean, there's a long history in the Gulf of overambitious leaders making these kind of overambitious promises and them not working out. But people were skeptical that the Qataris could make the World Cup function, and it was the best organized World Cup ever. People were skeptical that Dubai would ever be anything more than a tiny little fishing village, and here we are. It's one of the most important financial centers in the world today. So who knows? Maybe they will make it work. I'm still skeptical, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just asking myself what could go wrong, because you're right. It's really just wonderful what's going on with Dubai, especially, and maybe, just maybe, that type of thing could happen in El Salvador as well, because things do change. I mean, when I first went to Haiti back in when was that? 1970, something like that. Port-au-Prince was ultra safe. I mean, you could walk down the street in Port-au-Prince with $100 bills hanging out of your pocket. Nobody would touch you. Well, there was a reason for that. There were several reasons for that. But one of them was the Tonton Macoute would make you very sorry if you touched a tourist, if your body was ever found. Uh, the perpetrator's body was found. Now, Port-au-Prince is absolutely a hellhole. So things can go from bad to good and good to bad in lightning speed in today's world. And maybe you're right. Maybe El Salvador is going to experience a real renaissance for the same reason that Dubai did, huh?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, you look at El Salvador; it's such a beautiful country. The nature is amazing. It's on the Pacific. It's got amazing mountains, and it's a really beautiful place. And you'd look at it, and also I remember when I lived in the U.S. I mean, El Salvadorans have an excellent reputation all over the U.S. for being hardworking people. Their communities are always very, everybody likes El Salvadorans. They just come, they work hard, and you think a country's so beautiful with the people so hardworking, and then you walk around and everything is kind of decrepit and not very nice looking, and there's something missing. And then you remember, oh yeah, well, this was the murder capital of the world. Obviously, not a lot of people making investments. Well, now the murder capital of the world is no more. It necessarily follows people are going to start making investments, and I think there's a huge potential. There's a huge missed gap of missed growth that this place has missed out on, missed capital, missed investment over the past decades because of crime. And now, if you're just going to unleash all of that pent up missed growth, and now you can start investing at a time when people are struggling to find a place where they could live safely. I mean, think about how many people in the U.S. worry about the safety of their children because of crime, and now El Salvador becomes a realistic option because it has good economic policy, and it is safe, and it's got better weather than the U.S. It's got better beaches, it's got nicer mountains. The potential is truly astounding.
Yeah, it is amazing because I guess for many years the main export of El Salvador was people, and maybe that will go into reverse at this point. I'm wondering, what do you think, however, they're going to do with the 65,000, I think that's the number I've heard, presumed gang members that are in the prisons? What are they going to do with that inventory of prisoners, do you think?
I don't know. I have no idea. I did not discuss it with the president. I remember him tweeting something along the lines of saying, somebody said, we must have mercy, and he said something which stuck with me, which I think is quite profound. He said, maybe God will provide them mercy in the afterlife, but in this life, they will have to pay for what they did. And I think that there is a point in it, that there's a very profound point here, which is that, forget the exact saying. I think it's something, I'm not sure if it's an Arabic saying or an English saying, but it's something along the lines of lenience toward criminal is injustice to the victim. And that's what it really comes down to. Like, I think for the 99% of people of El Salvador who are not in prison, I mean, at this point, even if you have a direct family member who is in prison, and even if your life is massively inconvenienced by the fact that your husband or your brother or your father is in jail, your life is still better off, even with that very important person gone, because you can walk the streets. So like it's a very tough sell to try and tell people, let's bring those people back into society, because they've experienced what it's like to not have them there, and it's going to be very difficult for somebody to make the case for them to get back anytime soon. Although I think over time, I think you can't promise leniency from the beginning. I think leniency is something that you grant after people have given up on you being lenient. So probably, maybe in a few years or so, I think there'd be some kind of intervention. But I think another point that occurs to me, which is massively understated, is that realistically, yeah, these people, it sucks for them that they're in prison. But think about all the people that didn't get murdered over the last 2 years in El Salvador. Those people are the ones are almost entirely in the prison. The vast majority of them are in the prison. So, I mean, obviously there was a lot of innocent victims of murders, but the majority of murders are gang on gang murders, people terrorizing each other and fighting each other. Now those people, a lot of them are alive just because they're in jail, because they and the people they would have been fighting with would have been killing each other. So I think they themselves might also see the wisdom and the case for why they are better off staying in jail. It seems to be working out for everybody, including them. Who, what kind of life would they have been looking forward to in a country that continues to suffer under crime, where they are continuously at war with other gangs?
That's a very good point. As much of a fan as I am of Dubai, I've got to believe that, well, Abu Dhabi's a little bit. I mean, the whole Gulf, I guess, is going to profit from the example of Dubai. So I expect things are going to continue in the direction that they have been. It's a good bet. They're both good bets, actually. Safe. I like both of those.
Yeah. Well, glad to hear that. I mean, I'm very flattered getting Doug Casey's endorsement of my choice of countries.
But here I am in Argentina and in the U.S., although we'll see what happens in the U.S., assuming they have an election in 24. As outrageous as it sounds, it may not occur. That's a long shot. They'll probably have an election of some type. I expect the Democrats are going to win, which won't be good.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it's I don't like to get into U.S. politics. People get too emotional about it, and I don't really care much.
Oh, they do. And of course, that's one of the problems of the U.S. is that people take politics so seriously. It's one of the nice things about Switzerland is that nobody even knows who the president of Switzerland is, including most Swiss citizens.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about that country. Although it is becoming more and more normalized and more fiat of an economy, and the government is growing there as well, unfortunately.
That's true. And I can't think of any place in Europe that seems to be on the right trajectory. And I don't like the Wall Street Journal, not nearly as much as I used to. It used to be a good newspaper, but they had one article that was interesting a couple of days ago. I don't know if you saw it. That and this is unusual for the journal. It pointed out and gave a lot of statistics on how the average standard of living in Europe was going into collapse, actually, at this point. And the article said, and it was interesting because it was just a projection, that the standard of living in Europe was likely to fall to that of Ecuador by 2035. I had to do a double take on that. That is a radical thing to occur in a mainstream newspaper like that in the U.S. So things are changing all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. The world truly is changing quite a bit. It's It's a remarkable time that we're going through. So, what are your other tips for aspiring anarcho-capitalists navigating the world? What are some tips that you would give to people who want to live the Doug Casey life?
I think the most important thing you can do is to arm yourself with as much knowledge about as many different areas of the world as you possibly can. And that would include economics, science, history, conditions other places in the world. That's number one, because the only thing that you really own are the things in your own mind. Everything else can be taken away from you. So you've got to fortify your own mind as much as possible. And you do that mainly with knowledge. And I've also got to say with ethics, which is also something that you have yourself, and they can't take that away from you. Those two things, number one. And number two, in order to put the theory into practice, you've got to build capital. And capital allows you to insulate yourself from the stupidity that is all over the world. So it's important, if you're a libertarian, if you're a free thinker, to not just think about money. It's like they say, Mrs. Marx said to Carl, stop writing about capital and get some of it. And this is a problem with a lot of libertarians. So I think it's important to get some capital so you're insulated from the bad things in the world. Those are the two main things that I'd put my finger on. Those would be my takeaways.
Yeah, this is excellent, solid, all-weather advice, basically, that works at any very time and place, pretty much. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. I enjoyed very much chatting to you, and I hope we stay in touch. Can you tell us more about where listeners can find out more about you, follow your work?
I guess there are three places. Well, all my books are available on Amazon, and I do urge people to look at the novels because they're a lot of fun to read, and they're full of interesting information. Also, Speculator, Drug Lord, and Assassin. Number two, I have a podcast on YouTube, which we have a new one, sometimes two, or sometimes even three, every week. It's called Doug Casey's Take. And the third thing is internationalman.com. Just go to internationalman.com, and we have great articles there by a bunch of people every day. It's free. So, including myself, actually. So those are the three things that I draw people's attention to.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, Doug. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Saif. It's just been it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I'm very pleased.
Likewise, hope to do it over steaks in Argentina someday.
I'd like that very much.
All right, have a good day.